Hi there, this is your narrator Ali, and I hope you are ready to relax and hear the story of Prophet Shu'aib. A desert wind moves over a narrow green valley, carrying the scent of acacia trees and the dust of old caravan roads. It slips between rocky hills, brushes the surface of ancient wells, and circles the ruins of small market towns that once rang with the sound of bargaining voices and clinking weights. Somewhere near the eastern edge of the Gulf of Aqaba, where the land between Arabia and the Levant narrows, there lived a people who enjoyed the blessings of trade and fertile soil. They were known as the people of Madyan. Their stalls were full, their scales busy, their storehouses rich. Yet beneath that prosperity lay a sickness, not of the body, but of the heart. Into that sickness Allah sent a man from among them, gentle in temperament, yet unshakable in truth. His name was Shu'aib. This is his story. Chapter 1. A Valley of Trade and Temptation. In the northwest of the Arabian Peninsula, between the red ridges of the Hijaz and the lands of Sham, lay a town called Madyan. It sat near springs and wells, its fields irrigated by channels that glimmered in the sun. Caravans passing between Yemen and Syria stopped there to water their animals, buy provisions, and sell goods: frankincense, spices, woven cloth, leather, and metalwork. The people of Madyan were Arabs, descendants, according to many scholars, of a branch of the family of Ibrahim. Some traced them to Madyan, one of Ibrahim's sons. Others spoke of kinship through Ismail. Whether the genealogies were debated or not, one thing was certain: they lived in a region crisscrossed by stories of prophets. Not far to the north lay the land where Lut had preached to a people destroyed for their shamelessness. To the south and east stretched the routes along which Ibrahim himself had once walked. Yet familiarity with prophetic history did not protect the hearts of Madyan from being seduced by their own comfort. Prosperity has a way of dulling the sense of dependence on Allah. In well-watered fields and busy markets, gratitude can quietly give way to entitlement. In the souk of Madyan, merchants arranged their wares with skilled hands. They knew how to lay out fabrics so that their colors gleamed, how to stack dates so that the ripest ones sat on top, how to speak so that a customer felt flattered and hurried at the same time. They also knew how to place their fingers on the scale in such a way that it seemed balanced when it was not, how to shave a little from the measure of grain, how to praise an item beyond its worth and hide its flaws under clever words. Short measure became so common that an honest scale looked strange. Weights were subtly hollowed, scoops made slightly smaller than they appeared. To a visitor, each theft might seem tiny, a pinch of grain here, a sliver of silver there. But over thousands of transactions, those pinches piled into fortunes. Their greed did not end at the stall. The roads leading in and out of town grew dangerous. Bands of men, loyal to local chiefs, took position on hilltops and bends, sometimes demanding unlawful taxes, sometimes terrifying travelers with threats until they paid more than was due, sometimes simply seizing goods and leaving victims stranded. What made it worse was that these practices were not seen as shameful. They were considered clever. A man who could cheat without being caught was admired for his intelligence. A tribe that grew rich using such tricks was praised for its success. Those who objected were called naive or weak. In their hearts, many among Madyan no longer believed that Allah would hold them to account. Some denied his existence outright. Others gave him lip service while treating his commands as ornamental, something for prayer mats and oaths, not for scales and contracts. It was precisely then, when dishonesty had become normal and exploitation respectable, that Allah chose one of their own to rise among them, a man whose lineage they knew, whose childhood they had watched, whose character they could not easily dismiss. Chapter 2. The Voice of Shu'aib. Shu'aib was not an outsider sent from a distant land. He was their brother, as the Quran calls him, a member of the very tribe he was sent to correct. He knew the faces in the market, the nicknames of the elders, the gossip that passed in the alleyways. He had walked the same roads, drunk from the same wells, and watched the same caravans that had made Madyan prosperous. Yet, while others saw only gain in every transaction, Shu'aib saw something else. He saw the faces of buyers who left the market with lighter bags than they had paid for. He saw travelers trembling at roadblocks, forced to surrender goods under threat. He heard jokes about fools who insisted on honest weighing, and he felt a quiet ache where others felt pride. When the call of prophethood came to him, it did not arrive as a vague intuition. It came as a command. Call your people back to Allah, remind them of justice, warn them of what awaits those who corrupt a land after it has been set right. Shu'aib stepped into the marketplace not as a merchant that day, but as a messenger. He spoke first of the foundation beneath every command. Worship Allah alone. You have no other true God besides Him. He reminded them that the one who had given life to their valley, who had multiplied them from a few households to a thriving community, was the same one who knew every grain they weighed and every coin they took. To cheat His creation was to stand in arrogance before Him. Then He addressed their specific sins in language they could not mistake. He urged them to give full measure and full weight, to stop taking even a little away from what belonged to others. He warned them not to roam the roads like predators, threatening and hindering those who wished to follow Allah's path, or those simply seeking safe passage. He did not demand payment for His preaching. He asked no fee, sought no seat of power. Again and again, He made this clear. His reward, He said, was with Allah. This made His message harder to dismiss as self-interest. He had nothing to gain from their honesty except the pleasure of His Lord. At first, some listened out of curiosity. They knew Shu'aib as soft-spoken, perhaps even physically delicate. The traditions later describe him as having a gentle voice, and some say he was nicknamed the eloquent one among the prophets. They might have expected him to be easily swayed or intimidated. But when they challenged him, they found a firmness that surprised them. He was not a man of harsh words, yet he did not bend when they told him that his preaching threatened their profits. He did not soften his condemnation of cheating even when powerful merchants frowned and muttered that he was undermining business. He reminded them of peoples before them, nations that had once flourished but collapsed under the weight of their own corruption. Look, he urged, at what became of those who sowed mischief. Do you think your markets will last forever if they are built on deceit? His words fell on hearts in different ways. A small group felt their consciences stirred. They began to correct their measures and treat travelers with more care. Others gritted their teeth, feeling both guilt and annoyance. The chiefs, however, felt something more dangerous. They felt their authority threatened. Chapter 3. Threats from the market lords. In every town, There are those whose power is not written on banners, but on ledgers. The chiefs of Madyan were men whose wealth came directly from the practices Shu'aib condemned. They owned the largest warehouses, controlled the most active caravan routes, and employed guards who doubled as road bandits when no officials were watching. To them, Shu'aib's call to honesty sounded like the opening of a floodgate that would wash away their advantage. If every merchant gave full measure, their own enormous profits would shrink. If the roads became safe and tolls fair, their private taxes and ambush fees would vanish. They began to meet in shaded courtyards, discussing how to respond. Some suggested ignoring him, hoping his voice would fade. Others wanted to ridicule him publicly, turning him into a joke. A few argued for harsher measures, that if he continued, he and his followers should be driven out of the town altogether. Over time, ridicule became their favored weapon. In the market, they would point at Shu'aib and say, "Here comes the man who thinks our fathers were all thieves. Listen to him if you want to end up poor." They claimed he was bewitched, that strange ideas had taken hold of his mind, that he was a liar claiming revelation to gain attention. But when ridicule did not silence him, they escalated to direct threats. One day, in a public gathering, the leaders spoke on behalf of the town. "Shu'aib, you and those who have believed with you will leave this city, or you will return to our way of life. We will not allow you to live among us while you insult our norms." Their demand went beyond silence. They were not satisfied that he stop preaching. They wanted him to renounce his beliefs, to come back to the religion and practices of their ancestors, to stamp his approval on their cheating and oppression. Only then would they consider him safe. Shu'aib's answer was calm but unyielding. He asked them a question that illuminated the absurdity of what they were asking. Would you really have us pretend not to see what is wrong? Would you have us lie about Allah after He has saved us from such ways? He explained that the believers could not simply return to the old religion as if belief were a set of clothes to be changed at will. Faith had reshaped their hearts. Conscience had awakened. To go back would be to stand knowingly against their Lord, an act far worse than ignorance. He reminded them that Allah's knowledge encompassed all things, that no trick in the market, no ambush on the road, no whispered plan in a private room escaped him. And he reaffirmed his trust. Whatever the chiefs plotted, he and his followers would rely on Allah, asking Him to judge truthfully between them and their people. His words did not move the chiefs to repentance. They moved them to fury. Among themselves, they warned the townsfolk, "If you follow Shu'aib, you will become losers. You will end up weak and poor, stripped of the cleverness that has made us rich." So the town split visibly into two groups, a small community of believers adjusting their lives to the Prophet's teachings, and a majority clinging more tightly than ever to their old ways, resentful and suspicious. The air of Madyan grew tense, as if laden with heat before a storm. Chapter 4: Seized Wealth and a Prophet's Patience. When argument failed to break Shu'aib's resolve, the powerful men of Madyan turned to a weapon they trusted more than any: control over wealth. Quietly at first, then more openly, they began to boycott those who believed in Shu'aib. Merchants who refused to cheat found customers no longer coming to their stalls. Travelers warned by the chiefs stayed away from the shops of those known to follow the Prophet. Debts owed to believers were suddenly disputed or delayed. Then came direct seizures. One by one, Shu'aib's followers found their goods confiscated under various pretexts. A shipment would be declared illegal and taken. A house would be claimed by a chief as payment for an invented fine. Some were evicted from their homes entirely, forced to camp at the margins of town. Shu'aib himself was not spared. Property in his family name was contested, accounts frozen, doors slammed in his face. The people of Madyan, proud of their commercial cleverness, used every legal and illegal trick to squeeze him and his companions. The aim was clear: make the cost of faith so high that people would abandon it. Perhaps Shu'aib, seeing his followers pressed into poverty, would relent. Perhaps he would soften his message or agree to keep it private. He did not. He watched the hardship of his people with a heart that felt every blow. Yet he encouraged them to hold firm, reminding them that provision comes from Allah, not from the favor of corrupt men. He counseled patience, not in the sense of passive surrender, but as a deliberate choice to trust that justice would ultimately belong to their Lord. Eventually, the persecution took its final form. The chiefs expelled Shu'aib and the believers entirely, driving them out of the town with insults and threats. Some narrations describe them leaving with little more than clothes and a few possessions, forced to camp in the rough lands beyond Madyan's cultivated fields. Standing beyond the reach of the city walls, Shu'aib turned toward his Lord with a plea that carried both sadness and clarity. He had conveyed the message, argued, advised, and waited. The people had not only rejected him, but also oppressed those who believed. Now he asked Allah to bring a decisive judgment between them. His supplication was not a cry of revenge. It was a surrender of the case to the only judge who knows all hearts. And, as with Lut before him, that prayer marked a turning point. Mercy in the form of waiting gave way to mercy in the form of truth unveiled. Chapter 5. The Day of Shadow. The first sign of the coming punishment did not appear as fire or thunder. It came as heat. A dry, merciless heat settled over Madyan. The wind, once cool at dawn and dusk, turned hot like air from an oven. Wells seemed less refreshing. The shade of trees no longer brought relief. People wrapped damp cloths over their faces, moved sluggishly through the streets, and cursed the sky. Days passed, and the heat did not break. The sun burned down upon roofs and stones until the very walls of houses radiated discomfort. Animals grew restless, some collapsed in the fields. Men who prided themselves on endurance now sought any corner of coolness, but found none. According to classical accounts, the torment lasted 7 days. Those who had once mocked the idea of divine punishment now felt something pressing on them that was not like any normal weather. Yet instead of repenting, most hardened further. Some grumbled that if a god were angry with them, they would answer him with curses of their own. Then, one afternoon, as hope seemed nearly gone, a cloud appeared. Its shadow stretched across part of the sky, promising shade. People pointed and shouted with relief. Children clapped their hands. Adults hurried toward the area beneath its cover, confident that rain and cool air were finally on their way. They gathered eagerly under the dark canopy, thousands of them, pressing together in courtyards and open squares. The moment carried a cruel irony. The very peace of heaven they had once challenged Shu'aib to bring down upon them had now arrived, and they rushed toward it, seeking comfort. But this was no rain cloud. It was the shadow of which the Quran speaks, the sign that the appointed time had come. Suddenly, a deafening sound tore through the air, a shriek or blast that seemed to shake the bones. The ground quivered. Lightning or blazing fire burst forth from the cloud, hurling down upon the people. Walls shuddered, roofs collapsed. Men and women who had mocked Shu'aib's warnings fell where they stood, their bodies stiffened in terror. Some narrations add that the earth convulsed beneath them, an earthquake throwing houses onto their inhabitants so that they lay face down in their own homes, as if they had never lived there at all. The lively markets, once noisy with haggling and boasting, fell silent. The scales lay overturned, their deceitful weights scattered in the dust. From a distance, Shu'aib and the believers watched the cloud roll over the town and the sky flash with an otherworldly light. The roar of the punishment reached their ears, followed by a stillness so complete it felt almost unreal. Madyan, so proud of its cleverness, so secure in its crooked wealth, was reduced in moments to a graveyard. The Quran describes it in a few piercing words. They collapsed in their homes, as if they had never prospered there. The valley returned to silence, its markets empty, its roads cleared not by human reform, but by divine decree. Chapter 6. Turning away without regret. When the echo of the punishment faded, Shu'aib did not rush into the ruins. The matter had been placed before Allah, and Allah had judged. He turned instead to his own people, the small band of believers who had borne years of ridicule and deprivation at his side. They had lost relatives in Madyan, neighbors, perhaps even loved ones who never believed. They carried grief in their eyes, yet also an awe at the power they had just witnessed. Shu'aib spoke to them not as a man content with vengeance, but as one who had completed a mission. He reminded them that he had conveyed his Lord's messages fully and offered sincere counsel. He had warned and waited, pleaded and prayed. Those who rejected had not harmed Allah by their refusal, they had harmed themselves. Then he said something that might sound hard, but carries a deep lesson. He declared that he could not grieve over the destruction of those who had persisted in disbelief and injustice, not because their suffering meant nothing to him, but because he understood that Allah's judgment is never random. To cling emotionally to a community's outward success after it has openly defied its Lord is to doubt the wisdom of the one who knows all things. Shu'aib and his followers turned away from the ruins, leaving them to the wind and time. For them, a new phase of life had begun. They would carry the memory of Madyan as both warning and reassurance. Warning against creeping injustice in their own dealings, reassurance that the one they worshipped was not blind to oppression. The Quran later compares the fate of Madyan to that of Thamud, another nation that cheated and oppressed until an awful cry seized them. The repetition is part of the message. Societies may differ in language and era, but the pattern of rise and fall under moral law remains the same. Chapter 7. Echoes in the life of Musa. The story of Shu'aib does not end entirely with the fall of Madyan. Its echoes reach into another prophetic life, that of Musa. Years after Madyan's destruction, the broader region still carried the memory of what had happened. Yet some branches of the tribe remained in neighboring areas, or the land once known as Madyan was resettled by related people. It was to this region that Musa fled when he left Egypt after accidentally killing a man while defending a weak Israelite. The Quran tells how Musa arrived at a well in Madyan and found shepherds watering their flocks, while two young women waited at a distance, unable to push forward among the crowds. He helped them, drawing water for their animals, and later met their father, an elderly man of honor who invited him into his home and offered him work and marriage to one of his daughters in exchange for years of service. Islamic tradition often identifies this wise elder as Shu'aib himself, though the Quran does not name him explicitly. Whether it was Shu'aib or a man from his community, the connection is meaningful. Musa, a prophet who would confront one of history's greatest tyrants, was trained in patience, humility, and honest labor in the very land where Shu'aib had once preached against corruption. In the quiet years Musa spent as a shepherd, he would have walked the same hills, drunk from the same wells, and heard local stories of the town that had been destroyed for cheating and arrogance. If the elder was indeed Shu'aib, Musa would have sat with him, listening to first-hand accounts of how a people can grow blind to their own injustice until it is too late. Thus, Shu'aib's legacy extended beyond his own nation. His valley became a classroom for another prophet, and his example of steadfastness in the face of economic wrongdoing became part of the spiritual training that would one day topple Pharaoh's pride. Chapter 8. The Scales. Within the story of Shu'aib is, on its surface, about a small town destroyed for dishonesty in trade and oppression on the road. But beneath that surface lies a more subtle theme, the battle over the scales within each human heart. The people of Madyan did not see themselves as villains. They saw themselves as practical, clever, savvy in commerce. They might have argued that everyone cheats a little, that no one gets rich by being overly scrupulous, that a few missing grains on the scale mean nothing in the grand flow of the market. They justified highway intimidation as protection fees or necessary tolls. Shu'aib's message exposed the lie beneath those justifications. Every grain has weight with Allah. Every coin taken unjustly is recorded. Every traveler terrified on the road carries a complaint to the Lord of the roads and the travelers. The earth itself, once set in an order that allows life to flourish, is violated when people use its resources to spread corruption and fear rather than justice and mercy. For modern listeners, the story holds a mirror. Cheating today may not involve stone weights and clay jars, but it appears in doctored invoices, hidden fees, forged documents, inflated claims, and exploitation of those who lack bargaining power. Highway robbery may wear the face of predatory lending, corrupt taxation, or systems that trap the vulnerable while the powerful walk free. Shu'aib's stand reminds that true worship of Allah is inseparable from honesty in dealings. Prayer without integrity in contracts is like a beautifully decorated bridge that collapses under the first real weight. A heart that proclaims there is no God but Allah, yet places profit above conscience, risks walking the same path as Madyan, even if its streets look more advanced. There is another lesson in Shu'aib himself. He was not a warrior prophet with armies, nor a king with the power to enforce law by decree. His tools were words, patience, and trust. He spoke clearly even when his people mocked him as bewitched. He stayed calm in the face of economic strangulation. And when all outward means failed, he placed the case in Allah's hands without bitterness, accepting both the delay and the final decision. In a world where many feel powerless before large systems, Shu'aib's story offers both challenge and comfort. The challenge to scrutinize one's own scales, to refuse participation in injustice even when everyone is doing it. The comfort to know that no act of honesty is wasted and no act of oppression is ignored, even if human courts fail. The valley of Madyan, with its ruined markets and silent roads, stands as a monument not only to wrath, but to justice. It whispers to every soul that bends casually over a scale, that signs a contract without reading its fairness, that laughs off a small deceit. We once thought our cleverness would save us. It did not. And in the midst of that whisper, the figure of Shu'aib stands, a man whose voice, though gentle, outlasted the noise of his entire city. His words, carried in revelation, continue to travel farther than any caravan his people ever dispatched. For anyone who hears that voice and lets it recalibrate the inner scales, the story of Shu'aib becomes not a tale of distant destruction, but a living guide, teaching how to walk through markets and along roads without losing sight of the one in whose hand all measures ultimately rest. For more stories that can help you relax, don't forget to like and subscribe.